Hello, let's learn a Sicha together. Sicha number 2, Parshas Devarim, Chelek Yud Daled. It's a straightforward Rashi Sicha asking a simple question. Why didn't Rashi address a certain question? Which is interesting. We've seen quite a few Sichas in that gang in that way recently. And it's addressing the end of Perek Aleph. Towards the end, we start reading the story of the Meraglim. Moshe Rabbeinu is repeating to the Jewish people in his speech that he's giving just before he passes away, the story of the Meraglim. And he talks about that Hashem heard all the complaints that the Jewish people had by the story of Meraglim, and he swore, and he said that nobody, in Pasuk Lamed Hey, nobody from this bad generation will see the good land that I promised to your ancestors. Pasuk Lamed Vav, besides Kalev ben Yefuna, he is going to see it. V'loy etin es arts, and I'm going to give him the land Asher Darach that he walked through. Ulevanav, and to his children. Yan Hashem ilei Hashem, because he followed Hashem's command. Okay, straightforward, right? Skip a pasuk, just for argument's sake, and see how it flows. Pasuk Lamed Ches. Yeshua ben Nun, who's standing before you, he's going to come also to the land. Strengthen him, chazek, give him strength, and that's something that Moshe Rabbeinu repeats many times. Strengthen Yeshua, and he tells it to Yeshua directly towards the end of Chumash for him. Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and brave. Because he's going to inherit the land for all the Jewish people when you guys come into Eretz Yisrael. Revi, that's the Revi. But between the two psukim, between Kalev and Yeshua, who are the two spies who didn't get corrupted in the story and both managed to get into the Holy Land, he sticks another pasuk in which seemingly is totally out of context. Pasuk Lamed Zayin. Gambi, also me, son of Hashem, Hashem got angry. That's how Rashi translates it. Nismali Reges, Hashem got angry. Biglalchem, because of you, Lamer and Hashem said, Gam atalei savei shama. You too, Moshe Rabbeinu will not come to the land. 1 second. Pasuk Lamed Vav and Lamed Ches, 36 and 38, are talking about the spies, and the spies that did make it into the land. Suddenly in Pasuk Lamed Zayin, 37, he's talking about a sin that happened 38 years later. Remember, the spies happened in the second year. 1 year after they came out of Mitzrayim, Moshe Rabbeinu sent spies Sivan, which is March time, May time, and they came back and caused problems in Tisha B'Av. But the story with the rock happens in Parshas Chukas. It's almost 38, 39 years later. All the people are gone already from the first story. So who's he talking to? So Ramban says that he's just putting together all the people who can't go into the land in one package. But the question still stands. Why put it in between a story that happened 38 years earlier? And why is he saying Biglalchem, because of you? Because in that story, he's telling the story of the Meraglim. So he's saying because of you. But who's because of who? They're all gone. They're all dead. All the people that sinned with the Meraglim are gone. So why is he talking about it? And if he wants to include himself, then he should have said it together with earlier when he mentioned that the whole generation is not going to go in. Also, I'm not going to go in. Why in between the two people who are going in? Kalev is going in, Yeshua is going in. Oh, by the way, between those two people, let me tell you, I'm not going in. For a totally different story that happened 40 years later. So that's Ramban's answer that the Rebbe doesn't accept, at least according to Rashi. The next opinions, which is brought in Abarbanel and Arachaim, different opinions, but the same gang, the same direction, is Biglalchem. What does it mean because of you? Because of the sin of the Meraglim. That Moshe Rabbeinu says, I lost out because of the sin of Meraglim, even though he didn't have anything to do with the sin of Meraglim. So you could say that he was punished, Shlach lecha l'daitcha, because it was his calling, it was his call to send the Meraglim out, and therefore caused the Chet HaMeraglim. But the problem is, that's not why, at least according to Rashi, that's not the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't make it into Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't make it Eretz Yisrael. Rashi says very clearly, only in his words, Shaloi hoisa b'hem elazu bavad. Moshe and Aaron only had one sin, this sin of Meimah River when they hit the rock. So you can't say according to Rashi that the Meraglim story is the lead-on to caused him to not go. Arachaim has an interesting commentary that Chet Meraglim kind of brought sin into the atmosphere and that caused, but ultimately, according to simple meaning of Rashi, that doesn't fit. That's not why he got punished. 38 years later, he hit the rock. Then the Rebbe suggests his own answer, and that is that even though they're not connected, he's trying to show that the two sins are comparable. That Riva, when he hit the rock, and Meraglim are of equal status. And we've seen that before, that sometimes you'll put two things together to show the status, that they're equal. But first of all, the Rebbe says there's no big chiddush in that. We know that it was that the River, when they hit the rock, was a big deal. Hashem says, you made a chilul Hashem, you disgraced my name in front of everybody. And that's why they were punished. And also, if that's the case, then why are you mentioning it between the two people who got it right? Mention it by when a pasuk or two earlier, when we spoke about the sin that the other Jews did. Compare your sin to them, but how does it enter in middle between Kalev and Yeshua? So the Rebbe offers an answer. That basically, remember what he's answering. He's addressing the question, why didn't Rashi address this question? So you have to, the simple reading of the text has to answer something, and it has to answer it itself. If you notice, you'll see in Pasuk Lamed Vav, he talks about Kalev. And he says, Kalev got it right, and he's going to, and his children are going to inherit the land. If he went straight into the next Pasuk, Yeshua, Lamed Ches, you'll have a question, and that is, Kalev only gets the land. Yeshua doesn't only get the land, he's the leader. Hu Yavai Shama, Hu Yachilen as Yisrael. He's going to inherit it. One second, why Kalev not and Yeshua yes? What's the difference between the two? I have to say, by the way, why one of them was appointed to a leadership position. That's because I'm losing out. That means I'm telling a different story. I'm telling the story of the Meraglim. But although I'm telling you a story that happened 38 years ago that none of you really participated in, they all passed away, you might sit there asking me, so one second, why Kalev goes in, Yeshua leads? What happened to you, Moshe Rabbeinu? Let me remind you. Recently, I sinned. Biglalchem, because of you. Not because of the story that happened 38 years ago. Because of you. Why does he have to say because of you? So the Rebbe explains that Rashi already said earlier in Parshas Pinchas that whenever we mention the death, the misasim, the reason that they die, we also have to say what they did wrong. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu asked that people might, if you just say that Moshe Rabbeinu is not going to Eretz Yisrael and you don't say why, they might think that he sinned together with other people. So he asked, every time that I'm not going into the land, mention why I'm not going into the land. So because he mentions why he can't go into the land, because he mentions that he's not going into the land, he has to mention the reason as well. And what does he say? It's Biglalchem. That you guys caused, you were angry, there was no water, etc. You caused a lot of issues, and therefore I in a moment of haste, I hit the rock instead. So according to this, you understand that the pasuk Lamed Zayin is just like a Maimer Amusker. It's like a, by the way, I'm just going to give you context for the next pasuk and tell you that I'm not going in because of a sin that happened recently, and that's why, let me continue the previous story, Yeshua is not only going to go into the land like Kalev, he's going to inherit the land on your behalf as well. Now, I'll be honest, I learned the Sicha, and it took me quite a while to sit and record it, because I was struggling, what's the Hira? What's the take-home message? And I checked into the non-edited version of the Sicha in Taurus Menachem to try to find, but there doesn't seem to be a lesson over here from the Sicha that the Rebbe said on Parshas Devarim Tafshin Lamed Gimel. And I'm going to suggest something. I don't think it's the most mind-blowing lesson ever, but again, I'm trying to make something personal. The Rebbe always taught us that there has to be a bechein, there has to be a take-home message. What's the take-home message? So number one, that when you talk, you have to be clear in how you talk. In other words, when Moshe Rabbeinu could just go from Kalev to Yeshua, but it's important to give context to everything that you're saying. Often I find that when we're talking to each other, we're not giving enough context. You just say something and you expect people to understand it. And it's important to give a way of understanding and a way of context. And ultimately, that's just a small lesson. I just think that's important, that idea that it's important to give context. The other thing to understand is that somehow in between, whenever Moshe Rabbeinu talks about Eretz Yisrael, he brings up his own desire to go and the fact that he couldn't go. and that absolute frustration, V'eschanan al Hashem, like we see in next week's Parsha, that he constantly wants to go into Eretz Yisrael, and he's constantly mentioning it. It just reminds us that even though Moshe Rabbeinu knew it's not going to happen, he still is hurt and angry about it, and he's bringing it up at every single opportunity possible, because ultimately his desire was to go into Eretz Yisrael. If you have any other suggestions of lessons of the Sicha, I would love to hear it. If you could somehow get my contact information, leviavtzon@gmail.com, you could email me. I'd really appreciate to hear your thoughts.